Welcome, everybody, to the Cloud Education Series offered by Matrix Integrated Solutions. Today, I'm joined with Jesse and Stanton from Fraxion. Fraxion is a procurement and spend control management solution that is also integrated to Sage 100 along with other ERPs. And today, we're going to hear kind of at a high level what Fraxion does for us and what they can help control from a spending perspective. Jesse, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks for having us, Jeremy. We're excited to be here. I thought really quick I would just roll through a little bit of who we are scenario, and then from there we can have a conversation and discussion around um, what we can do with you for your clients and how we can help them do control over their spend in their companies, if that's all right.
That's perfect.
Awesome. So Fraction is a procure to pay solution, and we really focus around spend management. And we're going to talk about that as we go along, but just a little brief history on us. We've been around for over 20 years, working with partners like Matrix Integrated and servicing our clients and providing great solutions around that. And we've got over 1,000 organizations that have used our solutions. We manage about 15 billion in spend around the globe with over 200,000 active users. And what that shows everybody is the maturity of our solution, the maturity of our industry knowledge around these pieces. And our solution that you're going to see and talk about today is based on those 200,000 users and the things that have driven their business and made them better, and the best practices that they've been put into their businesses. And so all that's in the product that we provide. Um, our solution is really top rated by the users and leading in a lot of the categories. We've got a ton of reviews, Capterra and Software Advice about those. Um, and we're very cross industry. And so a lot of people ask, well, what areas or industries do you focus on? Because we're a spend management platform, we can actually go across many different platforms. In fact, some of your customers, Jeremy, I know that we do one recently that actually did boats on the rivers and hauling across that with Heinz Furlong, Furlong Line. Sorry, I got to get that name right.
Yeah.
Um, so we're able to actually service a dramatic or a very cross industry, very broad client that's looking just to control spend. And a few of your clients that we've worked with over the years here, we've been able to do that with you guys. Just here's some of the clients that we actually do work with. You'll see that there's lots of biotech, there's lots of different pieces. U.S. Space and Rocket Center. We're very diverse. We've done a lot of different pieces there. Um, but to talk about what we're talking about today, like you said, we work with it within the Sage 100 area, and we integrate to that. And what we focus on is using Sage as the base for your vendor information, your GL information, your budget information, and we get the users to be able to make a request. Uh, they've got when they need to spend something, um, they're able to then take that, go through an approval workflow to make sure that the right people are seeing it, whether that's based on department, dollar. Um, it could be any number of different ways on the approval process. And we talk about putting data in the hands of the decision maker at the point of decision. And that's a really critical piece. Um, we want to make sure that when people are making decisions that they have the information to date. That means not just what is in Sage as a paid invoice, but actually what have we committed, and what are those pieces that make up the overall spend, and so that they can make the best possible decision they can. And then we want to make sure we're enforcing any policies that you've put in place around spend, so people aren't buying things that they shouldn't be, and they shouldn't be spending money when they shouldn't be. And then we want to create that purchase order, we want to email and send that off to your vendors. And then as that's coming back, we want to capture the receiving, the packing slips. We want to capture the invoice, and we want to be able to make sure we can do that 2 and 3-way match. Sometimes we even call it up to a 4-way match. And then we want to take that data once that's all approved to be paid and push that back into Sage as an AP transaction. And that's really the process that we enhance and really make uh, automate and make better. And we work with companies like Matrix Integrated to make sure that we can do that. And so we provide really fast, easy mobile processes that are super efficient. We use best practices in doing that. We really can automate the purchasing expense and workflow approvals. And we can even tie and integrate into some of the bigger vendors and their websites, such as Amazon, Best Buy. Staples is called Punch Out. We we really control the way that we spend, but it's the visibility and reporting power that put this all together, so that when we look at a transaction, we can see where it's at, where the approval is, what's going on, where is it at in the process, how long has it been in that process, and really give people visibility. And we do that by automating, notifications and alerts, so that if we're getting close to budget on that on that budget, we actually have a notification that can go out and say, hey, you're getting close to hitting that budget, and you can set those however you want. And or someone who's buying something shouldn't be buying something. We can put all kinds of alerts and notifications so that people are getting system generated notes when they realize, when that system says, hey, you're out of where you should be, you're out of scope on this, you need to look at this, and then people can intervene and make a decision. That real-time budget visibility and tracking is huge. You want to know not just what your actuals, but you need to know what you've committed to be bought, or whatever's going on in that budget. And obviously policy compliance, and you want a full audit trail of that. It's, none of this works well if the auditors come and say, well, who did what where, and you can't show that. So we've got that full audit trail there. And then I talked about that's supplier approval, but you can also punch out. We also have internal catalogs, so it's a very, very robust system. A lot of things in there. Anyway, and that's just really quickly where we are. And we're, from a technology standpoint in the solution, even though we have two solutions, one is our older product called eRequester, which many of you may know and have heard of. We also have our Prime product, which is our cloud-based product. That's the one we're going to focus on more today. We have a whole mobile capability, so that if you've got a very dispersed workforce, lots of people working from home or for remote locations, their phone becomes that access to those, and we can even show you a demo of that today if you want, and look at that as we go through. But that's really who we are, what we do. So that's it for me. Tell me, I guess, Jeremy, when you talk to your customers, and you and I have talked to a lot of your customers over the last little while, what are the
Yeah.
questions that they ask? What are the things that, on your mind that going forward that they look at?
Yeah, I think when we look at our customer base, and especially with the time we're in with inflation and what's going on in the marketplace, and the supply chain disruption that we're all in, managing requests to buy things, and really getting control over what's happening spending wise, because margins are shrinking, and more challenges are there. So I think the first question we really get is kind of, what is spend control, and how do you best define? You defined it a little bit in your presentation just a few minutes ago, but what's the broad spectrum of spend control, and how would you
It,
define it?
and it's a great question, because when we talk about spend management, and so I'm going to invite Stan. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and have him share his. I think that's a great place to start. Is what really is spend management? Because a lot of people think of it just, why I'm just controlling my purchasing, but there's more to it than that. And so, Stanton, I know you kind of got your mobile client up there, but when we talk spend management, what's the best way to define that?
Yeah, Jesse, clearly today we're going to spend some time talking about procurement and the ability to manage your buying process through requisitions, robust approvals, and authorizations is super important, and that's a really significant part of our application. But when we conceived Fraxion, we looked at spend management versus just procurement. And for us, what that means is trying to cover as much of the spending activities that take place in an organization where a manager or an employee has an element of discretion. And so procurement is an important part of that, but we also incorporate things like expense claims and travel requisitioning. We deal with invoice approvals that don't have a request that originates them. So typically your contract type spend. We deal with travel requisitioning as a specific component of expenses. We deal with capital goods procurement. And in some cases, for organizations that need to provide cash in pocket, we deal with cash disbursements as well. And the idea and the concept behind Fraxion was to cover as much of the spending activities that can possibly take place in the business. The more you are able to manage, the more you're able to control, the larger what your savings opportunities. So conceptually, that's what we talk about spend control. It's more expansive than procurement, but certainly procurement is often the biggest component of that area that we're able to control.
Well, it generally has, and you're right, it probably has the biggest component of it, but at the same time, from a transaction perspective, especially once you get into expenses and all those type of things, the number of expenses that can have the chance to go rogue aren't necessarily inside of the purchasing process itself. It's in everything else that goes on, and being able to control that rogue spending really is part of what we do, so that you're not getting hit with invoices and bills that you just didn't know existed, and haven't been through an approval process. So Jeremy, does that help you a little bit in terms of, when we talk about spend management, what that includes?
It does, yeah. I think definitely opening the eyes to the expense management of travel and things like that, as that gets ramped back up with COVID ending and people getting back on the road. I think it's a place where you're opening my eyes to that being a part of your solution, not just the procurement. I think when we look down other questions that we get, the number one question is, I think we can go through a couple of the clients that we've put the solution in. The main question was, I have 25 people in our organization that need to put in requests to buy things, whether that be office supplies, expense type office supplies like that they need to operate, or they need to buy an asset, or they need to buy, goods for resale or whatever else. But what are the different ways that they can put those requests in? Or is it web-based? Is it inside a PC based? Is it mobile? How are the best ways to get those requests into Fraxion for approval process?
Well, and it's interesting because a lot of our customers, we get this question a lot, is we actually don't want them in our accounting system doing this. We want them to have a place that they can do it, we can track it, but we're not interested in having, 50, 100 extra people, 200, 300 people entering data inside of Sage 100 or Sage 300, whatever it might be. We don't want them in our accounting system. We want a controlled process that really manages well, but does and gives them access to some of the data that they need from our accounting system, but we don't want them in our accounting system. And that's really where our sweet spot is, and where we come in, because we're able to control the accounting system with the accounting people, but we're able to give people access to that data inside of that. And so, Stan, why don't we show them how easy it is to get in and create a request, and what that looks like, and how we're able to use some of that data that does come from the Sage product.
Fantastic. Jesse, often it's much easier just to show in while we're running through a demo. So let's actually do that. What I've got open at the moment is my web application. And as you saw beforehand, we had the mobile UI as well. Often for demos, it's a bit easier typing on. I've got fat fingers, so typing on a keyboard is somewhat easier than my screen. But when we open the Fraxion app, whether it's in the mobile or the web environment, depending on the configuration, we have a number of modules that are available for us. And depending on the roles that we have assigned to us, we have got some additional functionality in the solution. And we can buy directly from here, or we have these quick purchase buttons. I'm just going to go the sort of slightly long-winded way. Here we can see all the requests that I've submitted, what their state is, when and when they were last modified. Today we're going to focus really on just creating a requisition. So let's buy something. And Fraxion allows you to create requests in a free format way for either goods or services from a product catalog of some kind, or from a punch-out capability. And punch-out, Jesse, is what you were talking about a little bit earlier. Depending on the configuration of the system, depending on whether you have a Staples account, an Amazon account, this allows us directly from the application to navigate through to, for instance, Amazon in this example that we're using, where Amazon recognizes that this is a customer X's implementation of our spend management solution, and says, okay, do you have an Amazon business account, etc. In this case, I'm not going to really demo, but it takes you directly through, and you can select items from Amazon and select them, choose them, add them through to your requisition. Same for a catalog, and then same for free format requests. I'm going to just demonstrate with the free format, which is the most complex way of achieving this goal. So perhaps we're going to buy a laptop. It's the most common thing we use for demos. We identify when we require the item, how many we require. Maybe this one's $400. From which vendor we're going to buy the requisition. Now, obviously, if we use Punch-Out and we ended up going with Amazon, then Amazon would be the pre-populated vendor here. What the approval routing is.
And those vendors that you had there, Stanton, where are those coming from? Are those coming from the Sage system?
Correct. This is the first point of integration between ourselves and Sage 100. So the data we need to populate a requisition, including vendors, including GL codes, including the budgets associated with those GL codes, is all sourced from Sage 100. Included in that would be things like the tax schedules, the locations, etc. The approval or authorization writing is obviously something we do internally. So I can send things on a complex approvals route. These are just some of the examples that I've set up. And on automatic approval or different approval groups that mimic typically departments, cost centers, or important drivers in the approval structure. And we've got a very, very robust approval process that allows multiple levels of approval at different dollar thresholds. We can have groups of approvals. We can have approvals by line items. So each line item can go to a different approver. So very powerful from that perspective. Where the goods need to be delivered to, obviously these default from an employee profile that we store. And then if there's a need at this point to be able to allocate the costs associated with this transaction or this line item, we can do so. If we don't do it during the requisition level, then we certainly have to do it during the invoicing level prior to feeding that transaction back into Sage 100. And the flexibility of the system means that we're not only constrained to the GL codes or the cost allocation structures that come from within Sage 100, but for instance, if we want to say, hey, I want to associate this with a particular customer project and have a project-oriented approval or authorization. Or not only do I want it associated with a project or customer or a job, I want any other cost allocation approvals. Those are completely supported within the system. So it gives us a very powerful way of reporting afterwards. And the beauty is depending on if you've configured allocations or GL codes during requisitions, and you allow the user to have a look at what those approvals or authorizations are. You can see we can save it here. We can then, this one I've actually sent in a state of approval already. We can have a look at what the financial impact is. So we can see consumables, we don't have a budget, but for this particular customer, we have a budget. We can see that we've got $120,000. We spent $2,500, we've got 117 available. So it can be configured to ensure that the person submitting the requisition has got all the necessary information and insight before they raise the requisition, and obviously during the approval process, the same information is available. So it can be very useful from that perspective. And Jesse, that was reasonably complex in terms of sort of structures, but we can mimic a, sorry, I don't know, unfortunately my screen has disappeared here. I'll show in a later stage, but all that information, the ability to raise a requisition, to capture a requisition, is also available in the application, in the mobile environment, and that can be a very powerful feature as well.
Well, and one of the other things that you can do there, and people would notice at the bottom, but you can actually drag and drop any of the attachments that you want, or take a picture off your mobile phone and add that into this. So when people are going to look at those approvals, they can see all the different pieces. So let's say you've got a schematic you want to show, you've got a picture you want to show of a receipt, whatever it might be, all that's available to you there. And it's just drag and drop and away you go. Now, one of the things, and I know Stanton, this is really early in the process, but you did talk about Amazon there. And so I thought,
yeah,
there's a new technology coming out. So what we've talked about is Punch Out. And Jeremy, I don't know if you've heard about this recently. Have you heard about Punch In? So you're on mute there, Jeremy.
Apologize. No, I've not heard of Punch In. Can you give me the 2 cents?
Yeah. So just last week, Stanton and I actually met with Amazon as one of their preferred partners, and we're asked to participate in a program where you're going to see a different way of purchasing, where people actually start in, say, their Amazon business account, and when they go and make the purchase, instead of it saying, check out, it'll actually say submit for approval. they'll push submit for approval, and it will directly enter into our system, which is what happens now. But you start with inside of Fraxion in the punch in scenario. You could start in Amazon and just punch it in. And so we're going to be on the beta partner side of that. But it's certainly a new technology that people probably want to keep their ears and eyes open for going forward. I'm sure it's a year or two away from really general availability and acceptance, but we're pretty proud as Fraxion to be included in Amazon's inner circle on that and be part of their beta program and getting that out there. So it is something that to keep your ears open for and to be listening for, because it's going to change some of the way that people are buying and then the way things are happening out there.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just doing the same thing but opposite way, starting there and throwing it in versus starting in Fraxion and going out, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it adds some convenience to that. It's quite a powerful feature because what it means is you don't have to have logged into Fraxion firstly. You don't have to have an active session or a requisition that you're creating and say, because the process at the moment is, once you're in Fraxion, we say we want to buy something, and then we have some options in terms of populating that requisition, whether it's going to be an Amazon punch out, a Staples or Granger. In this environment, independent, Fraxion doesn't have to be open. A user logs into Amazon, and based on their identification, it's associated with their Fraxion account. So they shop as per normal, and when they go check out their cart, they've got an option to automatically create a requisition within Fraxion, route it for approval, and once it's been approved in Fraxion, then it'll automatically release those goods. So that's a very, very powerful feature.
Yeah, and it's super fun to be on the front side of that. Obviously, Amazon's leading the charge on that. But yeah, from a customer perspective on your side, being able to see that what's coming down the pipe earlier than normal is always fun to talk about. And as the technology gets better, it's super fun.
Very cool. So the next question that comes up, and you hit upon it a little bit, Stan, is the approval process. You talked about approvals in general. Maybe my manager has to approve my purchases, and then if it's over a certain dollar value, that maybe goes up to the VP, or maybe goes through both rungs of that ladder before approval happens. How do those approvals get sent out? Are they via email? Is it a dashboard? Is it a text message? What's the way that people can approve purchases or requests?
So, before I answer that question, I just sort of hone in a little bit, because approvals and authorizations is the core of what our solution is. So we have a very powerful concept of workflows and approvals. Workflows allow us to deal with the process flow of a particular requisition. It may, for instance, have a mechanism where you want pre-approval. Let me show you what that would physically look like in a product like Fraxion. And here's our workflow builder. And it says, well, after we create, we're going to submit it for approval. We're going to do it for purchasing. We have some options on purchasing, whether we're going to automatically create a purchase order, whether we want to consolidate multiple requisitions into an order. So Fraxion has the ability to define what we call these workflows. Within that, there's approval structures within the workflows. And let's choose one. Here's the one that I think we were going to demonstrate, where you can restrict these approval flows to certain request types if you wish. And then we build up an approver list where you can have, here we can see 3 approvers at a certain level and a secondary approver. And typically there's a dollar threshold. In this case, $250 is the limit at which this person can approve or authorize, at which point it'll escalate to the next level. And so this is how we build a complex process workflow and the approval structures associated with that process flow. And we can have some great features like allowing certain managers, for instance, to edit the cost allocation fields, because often when we enable users to create their own allocations, they incorrectly allocate. So we can correct that during the approval process. And then depending on what the desired device is that an individual is using, they'll get a note to approve something in the web application itself, like we have here. That presupposes that your web application is open. You'll receive a notification in your mobile application as well that tells you that you need to approve or authorize. So if you've got, and your preferred device is in mobile, you'll get that. In addition, we provide an email, a structured email that goes out to the user that informs them that there's a request that they have to approve or authorize, and directs them directly to the request so they can have a look at this request. And we can see what the approval or authorization workflow is. We can see in this particular one, there's 2 people that can potentially approve. They haven't approved. This is a demo environment, and we can see they haven't approved for 155 hours, so that's not great. And as a result, you can notice there's an alert in this particular request, and that's because the approval has been delayed beyond a predetermined time. So not only do we provide the automation flow to take a requisition as quickly through a structured approval, but if there are delays at all, then we notify people of these delays in a real-time environment.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think that's what I love is the notification piece. And the one part you didn't show there, Stanton, that is actually a newer part for us is the status bar in there that lets you know what's going on. But because there's multiple notifications, people should know what's going on. But if there isn't, be able to say, listen, we need to set up an alert or a notification that says, and this is where bottlenecks, we eliminate bottlenecks. So if something's been sitting in a requisition state for too long, we can start sending out notifications saying, hey, something's wrong. Why isn't this being approved? And this is the new status bar that we've just released in our last release that I think people are going to love because it shows exactly what's going on. Stan, why don't you tell us about that one?
Yeah, let me choose a request that's actually a bit further down the line, and let me just search for one that's in a sort of closed state. It'll give you an idea about just how powerful this is. So here's a request that's actually gone through an entire process. It's now closed, and a closed purchase request for us is one that's been converted into a purchase order. It's been fully received. There's the matching's been resolved if there were any problems, and it's been exported back into Sage 100. And often people during the process want to query the status of that request, and we try to create the sort of self-serve component. So we tell them when it's been submitted. We tell them when it's been submitted for approval and to whom it's gone for approval. In this case, it's already been approved, and we can see the audit trail around the approval here. In this case, it was automatic approval. We can see that it's been purchased, and when it was purchased, we can see the purchase order number if we wish, and we can drill down into the purchase order to see the details associated with that particular request. We can see when it was received, and we can see that it's been closed out as this environment. So from a user perspective, one of the biggest challenges, of course, is that, especially when you've got a centralized purchasing, is that the person wanting the goods or services isn't always the person who is able to place the order, and certainly isn't always the person who receives those items. And so it's often very important to provide that feedback mechanism, and we do so by way of emails, but also as people sort of want to have a self-service environment, to provide them with the tools so they can see exactly where the request is and where it's backlogged, if it is backlogged.
So that interface is available to the creator of the process or the request to say where are all my requests at in the lineup or in the status of the lifespan.
Correct. So we always provide a view, and here you can see the work center where all my requests are sitting, what the various states are, who they're sort of sitting with at the moment, and what the costs are. So we do provide that at a glance, but often it's slightly more nuanced. You want to be able to see exactly where it's gone, who's got it, and this is what the status bar is, to provide much more detailed insight into the status of that request.
Yeah, one of the parts that our people really like is the approval. So they've sent it off, and when I hover over that approval, it shows me who my next approver is. So if I'm not getting action, I actually know who it should be going to, and I can reach out and say, hey, what have I done wrong, or what's going on? Why aren't you approving my stuff? So when I'm doing my expenses, I can always look at it and say, hey, Stanton, I traveled here. When am I getting my stuff? And because I submitted that 2 minutes ago. 2 minutes.
It's been 2 minutes. That's probably the Jesse alert right there, telling me that I need to approve it automatically. But yeah, it's a very powerful feature, and it goes towards that ethos of high personalization, empowering the individual to be able to access the information they need to make the best buying decisions on behalf of the company.
Like you said, that's the work engine of your solution, definitely the cornerstone, and it's looks nice and flexible and easy to manage. So that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I think what the next part of the process is, now I've set the request in, it's approved, and a PO is created, especially in a procurement standpoint. That definitely is the case. Maybe not. Maybe you can talk about expense reports being a little bit different. I'm not sure that that creates a PO, but a PO is created. Does that PO stay within Fraxion? Does it go to Sage 100? Those are a couple questions we've had, and can you talk about the PO process once that request is approved?
Yeah, so we seem to see from a purchase order process two separate schools of thought. The one is typically for large organizations, an element of what we call central purchasing. In other words, that request is then sent through to someone who has a role of a buyer in an organization. And I think in this demonstration, I have this user as a buyer. And here you can see as a user, we can work by company, we can look at various requests that have been fully approved and authorized that I can convert into a purchase order. So this is a strongly centralized environment. Here I can say, well, I've actually got two requests to the supplier. We can sort by supplier. So I can say, well, I want to look at this particular supplier ABC, and I can see that I've got a number of requests that have been approved for the supplier. I can select multiple ones and consolidate them into a single order. Or if I choose just the one, I can go ahead and I can create an order. I can give a once over, add any kind of comments that I want to be able to have, and click the purchase. That allows me then to have an electronic document that I can email automatically. This picks up the email from the vendor master file, and we can send this email directly to a particular vendor. And there's a very nicely structured email, looks really attractive, and there's a PDF document that represents the particular order. And this process itself is typical of what larger organizations run in a fairly centralized environment. Here's a copy of what that order looks like and the terms and conditions associated with it. This is also a potential integration point into Sage where we can post purchase orders. Our most common integration into Sage 100, however, is not purchase orders, but rather the invoices associated with purchase orders. And so that's another integration point as well. In some environments where we configure the workflow, and this supports a more decentralized environment, is that once approval or authorization has taken place on that requisition, it automatically converts that into a purchase order and automatically emails that to the vendor and advises you that that email has been automatically generated and created. That's typical of small organizations or ones that need to be fairly nimble in terms of turnaround times. And while that's super helpful, because essentially there's just a purchase requisition approval, once it's approved, it flips it into a purchase order for you, it loses the opportunity to consolidate requisitions. So that's the only flip side around automatic purchase order conversion in a sort of decentralized environment. But both of those options are available to customers.
Yeah, and most of the ones that we've talked to you about, Jeremy, are more that decentralized purchasing, and that's that client base more what you're probably seeing in that Sage 100 area.
And receipt of, if we're pushing the PO to Sage, receipt of goods and receipt of invoice are done within Sage, or are they done in Fraxion and then updated within Sage? Can you talk through that process?
Yeah, so there's actually three integration points that are available with Prime. The first is, in some cases, for some customers, requisitions, once they're approved, are populated into the underlying accounting system. Then the scenario that we spoke about now is that if purchase order integration is required, then as you correctly point out, receipting and the invoicing matching process takes place within Sage. The most common use case that we have, though, and I'd say probably 80 or 90% of our customers fit into this category, is where Fraxion generates the purchase order. There is no integration at that point into Sage, but we do the full accrual accounting in terms of the budget drawdowns, so that people are 100% aware that there is this deducted amount from the budget associated with the open order. We do the receipting within our application, and the receipting is fairly simple, but it can be powerful. We can measure supplier performance, we can capture images, we can capture receipts, we can identify if there's a receipt issue associated with it. We can track in delivery references, or if it's a URL from a system like Amazon, we can populate it there. And then invoice matching takes place within Fraxion as well. And once it's been fully matched, we integrate it at the AP level. So that bill, that invoice is integrated into Sage 100. So those are the two common scenarios that we most frequently encounter, with AP integration or invoice integration being the most popular by far.
Yeah,
That makes sense. But
yeah, go ahead.
Visibility of quantity on hand and quantity on order and quantity on sales order, if you're going to that level, that would push that over to, say, push the PO to Sage. But if you're not looking for that type of information from a sales standpoint, then keeping it in Fraxion probably makes the most sense.
Absolutely, and that's probably the biggest differentiator. Most non-stock, non-inventory items would be completely done in Fraxion, the invoice passed across at the end.
And that's also actually how we differentiate between the two products that we do, is depending on if they're looking to purchase the inventory or not. And what we're seeing in our cloud-based solution is really that indirect spend that isn't related to your inventory or resale piece there. So that is one of the big differentiators.
Got it. And then the data stays in Fraxion and documents can be attached and all that information stays in Fraxion in the cloud, and then we're just pushing the invoice information over to AP.
Yeah,
that's correct. Yes.
And one of the big drivers, I mean, you've already built a system that, because you don't want people in your accounting system and then saying to them, well, you're probably, a lot of those same people ordering or doing the receiving, and now you're also giving them access to your accounting system to do receiving. They just want one streamlined process in one place to make it happen. At the end, you have that intervention of the accounting team to say, okay, yeah, it's approved, here it is, we're going to make that payment. And so really keeping all those people in one place with a very smooth and efficient process with huge visibility and auditability, that's the key driver of where they go with this, and then do that integration that Stan was talking about at the invoice level.
And one major difference between, I know we're kind of answering a couple of our questions in one fair swoop, but definitely one of the questions that we have that is definitely a differentiator between Prime and eRequester is the local install versus the web install. And Frac, can you talk to us about that infrastructure? Where does Fraxion live, and what sort of element needs to be installed on the server to integrate it to Sage 100?
That's a great question, and if I could deal with the integration afterwards, because that is slightly different. So the Fraxion app, as you have alluded to, is a pure cloud-based solution. So we sit on top of the Microsoft Azure platform, and we have multiple data centers. The primary data centers are either reside in the US or Western Europe. So depending on your customer's tolerance for sort of control and access, most US customers feel that the US is the best place, and most European customers, as you can imagine, feel Europe is the best place for that data to reside. So we have that as one of the choices. Choosing Microsoft Azure platform was really a relatively easy decision for us, because we wanted to provide high levels of security, making sure that the data platform itself is SOC compliant, and in some cases is government approved. And there's a specific certification process called FedRAMP certification for public sector organizations that require very, very high degrees of control and authentication. And that was our primary motivation for looking at Microsoft Azure as the platform. So the application and the data set associated with that is ring-fenced to a particular territory, as I said, either Western Europe or the US. Now that data consists of what information we need to pull from Sage 100 to be able to create a request. We spoke about vendors, we spoke about GL accounts, we spoke about actuals and budget data. We also have a spend analytics platform on top of this that's also based on the Microsoft Power BI data infrastructure, and that allows us very sophisticated analytics and reporting on the data. And once again, that's ring-fenced to the region or the territory that you operate in. But it does create some interesting challenges for a non-cloud-based ERP system like Sage 100. So to resolve that issue, Fraxion has a software tool called Connect. And Connect in effect acts as a bridge between an on-prem application and the cloud-based application. So there's a small agent that connect loads on the same network or has access to the Sage 100 server. And it acts as a shepherd of data backwards and forwards between the cloud, our cloud-based system, and Sage 100, where it integrates at a sort of fairly, I think it uses some of the COM objects. I'm not 100% sure specifically for the Sage 100, but it is a very powerful and secure feature. It batches information from Sage that needs to go to our cloud solution and vice versa. So it's sitting in the background, moving data and chaperoning that data across to make sure it gets across, dealing with the error messaging and error resolutions if there are any for that data. But it's powerful and slick. It does mean, however, that it's not true real-time integration. We don't really see that as a problem. Typically, we batch transactions and they move across every couple of minutes. So there is the possibility that if there's 20 transactions to a particular budget, and they're all happening simultaneously, that the data Fraxion has visibility maybe out by a minute or two, but practically we've never seen that as a concern. So that's how we handle that sort of data migration or transfer between cloud and on-prem systems. And we've got some great white papers and videos that we can make available to your team to show you how that operates in real life and what the implications are. But from our perspective, very smooth and trouble-free.
Yeah, and if you, sorry, go ahead, Jeremy. Yeah.
I was just saying the footprint all said and done is pretty small. That's I mean, from a standpoint of someone in a Sage 100 world, they don't need to invest in a big platform to make this happen. It's a small connector that pushes data back and forth between the two solutions, and that's
correct. It's a minuscule footprint, and in fact, we've further optimized it so we only do a diff of the data. So the delta, in other words, a changed information is the only thing that moves across on the internet. So not only is the footprint incredibly small, it's a little SQL DB that's installed. That's a couple of meg. The data that moves across is relatively trivial because it's only the differential.
So I think our last question is, I think near and dear to Jesse's heart when we're talking about expense management and traveling and taking receipts and capturing those and submitting. Is that a mobile app? I would assume it is. And can you discuss how you capture those expenses?
Yes, well, my mobile app wasn't working when I tried to demo it, so I might actually have to send you some video screenshots. I just don't, for some reason, can't display it on my screen. There are two options, though, Jeremy, in the cloud environment. So now I've come back to the office and I want to submit an expense claim, and we decide what kind of expense claim and what kind of expense it is. So if it's a meal, pop that up. Let's see. We want to create a meal. It's going to ask me, and this is the web application, who did I take? How many guests did I take out? What is the amount claimed? Drag and drop a copy of the receipt over here. That's post-transaction, I'm at home. The mobile environment, which I'm going to send you a little video to show you exactly how it works because I can't display it on my screen, is much, much easier. It's a super simple UI. We think one of the most elegant UIs that are available. Jesse, I think that in your demo, you might actually have a little screen render of the system. So we could show towards the end of that as well, how quick and easy it is to create a requisition or an item, an expense item within the mobile application.
And it is there, and it is slick and easy. And because I use it so often as I travel, it's as easy as literally going in, saying, this is the venue I'm at, this is the number of people, this is how much I spent, and then I just click and take a picture right off my phone, and away I go. And that's available on both Android and Apple, and they're out there for download and super easy to use. So, if you're not able to show that, I did want to actually. Jeremy, it wasn't in something that we discussed earlier, but I think it's probably worth showing just for a really quick second, is the power of our insights reporting tool. And there's a report in there of goods received not invoiced. that our customers just absolutely go bananas for. It is so funny when they look and go, oh, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Maybe just I'll have Stan just kind of show you, this is our Power BI based platform. It's called Insights. Just shows you a couple quick pieces, but I think showing that report, I think a lot of your people are gonna be like, oh, that's exactly what we're looking for. That's
Yeah.
the report that makes my world work.
The dreaded purchases clearing account, as we all know and love from ERP days, is
well,
just a bear to reconcile.
Well, let me show you how much easier it is in this environment. So as Jesse mentioned, this is our Insights application. So the base report you're seeing here is just a typical budget report where we want to be able to have a look at where we're sitting at actuals versus budgets that are controlled within the Fraxion environment. We present that information in many meaningful ways. We can look at who our suppliers are, and we can have a look at who our top 10 suppliers are in a particular category. We can drill down into them. We can say, what kind of transactions have we got through here? I want to drill down to the request details. And so it's like super powerful, and I can actually drill directly through to the underlying requests. So from all of these, I can go through to the requests. But the report that you're talking about is sitting underneath the operational reports. And what we often see is, I want to get an idea of what my open purchase order summary is. And this will show me what all my open POs are by state, by users, by vendors. Drilling down into those open POs gives us, what is the GL code associated with it? We can search, we can restrict it to a certain set or a certain period. Who's the vendor? How much is the PO total? How much of it is open? How much has been invoiced? So fairly powerful reports that you can utilize here. You can drill through to the underlying purchase order. So we can always go back to what is the purchase order that we're sort of dealing with in this environment. And we can export this in any format. So I can export this data as a table. I can expand on it to be able to see more information. I can immediately see where I've got an over-received situation, which I have here, that I need to worry about. And it gives me all the data that I need to be able to really understand what my accruals need to be for the end of that period. So very, very powerful reporting.
That accrual is not happening automatically in GL, or that liability that we received those goods yet. That's staying in Fraxion. It's a good point to bring up.
So yes, it would in an environment where we deal with the entire process, which, as I said, is our most common integration component. We have to be able to manage that accrual within Fraxion because it hasn't even hit Sage 100 yet. So we need to provide you with visibility of what that is. Got it.
Makes sense.
And this really allows you to then take action and look at these pieces very specifically without worrying about a few, has it already gone to the Sage system, and now what are we going to do? Because we've made a mistake, obviously, with not receiving it, but we've already put it through. So it really does help with the control and really making actionable items out of this. So
it does, and we've gone to a huge effort here in trying to make this information as friendly as possible. So for instance, if I'm a buyer in the organization and I want to understand how many laptops are we buying from who we're buying these things. So here I've immediately done a search of all my purchase requisition history, and I can see I've spent $71,000 on laptops. And that gives me an average cost per laptop of 78 that I've bought, and this is the total requests that these laptops were available, and we could sort them to find out who we got the best transactions for, and we can go have a look at an underlying transaction. So I want to see, look at this transaction. Here's the laptop that we did. Wendell wanted one and who it was approved for, and I could see what the approval audit trail was and all the details associated with it, what the purchase order is and everything. So really powerful reporting features that make it easier for organizations to understand what they're buying, to understand their various levels of commitments, to understand from whom they're buying, and what the various price variances exist at an item level.
And that's all built on the Power BI tool set from a reporting perspective. So it's a great platform to be on.
It is, and it allows us a very unique feature of being able to customize reports at a tenant level. So while this is a true multi-tenant environment and a true cloud solution, the way that we've implemented the reporting capabilities and implemented Power BI means that for a customer who wants custom reporting, wants the report to look slightly different, and is only available to them, that is completely supported.
Got it. So I think we're coming to the end. I think the last thing I want to discuss that wasn't on our total list is we kind of work through questions. How does the pricing work for Fraxion? Is it a subscription? Is it by user? How do you price out the mobile app? Can you give us some real brief outside? I know every scenario might be a little different, but how does it price out?
Actually, it's great. It's a great question because it's actually quite easy. All of our stuff is subscription based and it's user based. So you have your base system and then you're just buying users. Very simple process. You don't have to. There's not a complicated matrix of putting this around. It's fairly straightforward. And so you're basically paying by user and away you go. And the uh, mobile app is included in that subscription, so you're not having to pay separately to have that kind of access. And even the insights tool that Stanton just demonstrated is included in the tool. So you basically have, depending if you need things like some of the advanced purchasing and the Amazon punch out capability. So we have 2 levels of the product, and then it's just simply buying by user. So it's really simple, easy to do. Our on-prem solution side of it is just a little bit more modular based if you're looking at that on-prem type solution. But it is we try and keep that one as simple as possible to make it easy for your clients. And you and I have worked through a few of those recently, and it's a fairly straightforward, easy process.
And what would you say the estimation of signing and saying you want to move forward to go live? What kind of elapsed time are we typically in to implement a solution like this?
If we take it on the customer's timeline and take into account that they always have their own job to be doing other than implementing a system, usually it's about 6 to 10 weeks or 6 to 12 weeks, depending on their capability. Obviously, we have put them in as fast as a week or a week and a half. But those are where people can just dedicate nothing but time, and they've got a real urgency to it. But we say a typical one, just plan on, kind of 6 to 8 weeks if you're working at a reasonable pace, and things aren't too complicated on the approval side, and you're up and running. It's quite easy.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'll wrap up and just say thank you for your time and energy today.